is so weird. I never do handheld videos, but this is where we're at today because my stand is broken. But I was thinking about this last night after I came from one of my classes, so I wanted to bring it up because I think this could be some really good advice and decent help for women who have dealt with misuse from men or from abuse of any kind. Not necessarily physical abuse, but I think this definitely plays heavily into that. So I started taking jiu-jitsu classes again. Well, a few styles. I take Muay Thai, kickboxing, and jiu-jitsu because the gym I go to offers all three, but primarily I'm taking jiu-jitsu. And on top of the advice that we say just for physical safety for women to take self-defense classes, I wanted to go over a few other psychological things that can really help women, and the inverse idea that a manly or considerably manly sport such as that can actually help your femininity a lot. And just a few epiphanies that came to mind after I've been going for a while now. So I actually used to do a lot of martial arts back when I did gymnastics in my youth. And my dad and my brother were both competitive fighters, and they both learned multiple styles, did very well in it. But it was never my thing, and I always concentrated on the performing arts and the gymnastics and the dance side. So I ended up specializing in that, but I did do it and did enjoy it when I was younger, up until maybe the time I was like 14 or 15, on and off. But coming from a background of childhood abuse and then abuse in a relationship that I had, on top of the self-defense aspect, this actually helped me develop a stronger world perception of men. It also helped me develop a stronger perception of my own femininity and what chivalry was supposed to look like. And it really put me in touch with being triggered by some of the flashbacks I got, because in jiu-jitsu, you don't just, it's not, hey, go put on gear and spar and like punch and kick and stuff. You do that in karate or like kickboxing and all that. In jiu-jitsu, it's essentially like wrestling. That's the best way I know how to describe it. So you spend part of the class learning locks and defenses and guards and, all this other crap. But, at about halfway through the class, you actually start rolling with people. And when you do that, you're in very close contact and you're kind of like drenched in each other's sweat, and you're like suffocating each other at different points, and people go really hard. And because the studio I go to, there's not many women. It is primarily, I would say it's like 95% men. I'm typically the only female in the class, or maybe one of two females in the class so far. And I've never gone to a class where I've seen more than 3 women, including myself. So you get into these close proximities with men to the degree where it can trigger some of, maybe flashbacks or episodes or reminders of the same types or similar types of situations. So one would suggest maybe not taking this style until you're healed to the degree where you can handle being triggered. But if you can handle being triggered, I would say actually, like, don't be afraid of that and embrace that, because it can help the body stimulus response and help you kind of talk your way out of it. So when it would happen to me, I would either, because when you submit people in jiu-jitsu, you have to tap. So I would tap if my body was feeling uncomfortable, but obviously I wouldn't tell the person that I was rolling with why. But I would just tap if I felt too uncomfortable, and then would kind of mentally go through the scenario in my head and breathe and kind of regain my composure, like, hey, this is not that. So it helps you rewire the way that your body is being stimulated by the experience, because my body in those moments would tell me to panic, even though I might have had a good handle. I might have been winning the match while rolling, or I might be in a position where I could get out, and the people that I'm rolling with are incredibly respectful. So mentally, I know nothing is going on, but my body is still freaking out. So it helps you, because your brain is already in tune and your brain is already healed, to kind of reprogram what those types of stimulus means, and kind of almost treat the PTSD by rewiring, because your body is now associating it with a positive, respectful experience. So it helps me a lot with that, and I'm really enjoying going more for that aspect than learning how to fight, because I've always known how to fight. You can always get better, and confrontation is not something that I'm scared of, but I definitely enjoy the retraining of technique and becoming familiar with a new style of martial arts. But primarily, I would say that women should take self-defense because it can help your psychology in healing. So the other thing that it did for me is I'm around men who are typically much bigger than me, who are also athletically inclined to some degree. You know, it's different bodies. You know, there's people that look like super athletes in there, and people that are just starting. And it's different ages of men too. So you get a pretty good mix: age, race, athletic stature, height, weight, all of that. And one thing that martial arts does a really good job of is fostering an environment of mutual respect and an idea of chivalry towards women. And that comes both in the form of being soft on women when it's necessary, but then being rough on women when it's necessary in order to help them and help build them. And I think that in general, women have a real problem today with being led by men, because we see a lot of toxic men around us. But that environment, even if the men walking in could potentially be toxic or might be toxic on their personal time, when you're there and you're associating with them and you're having class, obviously people are in public, they're going to behave a little bit different. But just in general, the type of people that stick with this type of structure, because it is very disciplined and it teaches self-discipline, they're not your average male, and they're not driven 100% by sexuality. I'm sure there's some healthy aggression and sexuality in there as masculine fighters, but it's not the forefront. When you go into those classes, it's a whole new environment. So if you're used to being around toxic men, or you're used to living in a world perception where that's the only type of man you can see in your head, because the truth of the matter is there's actually a lot of good men and a lot of good women. But when you grow up, or you associate in circles where the only type of people around are people who are toxic and are people who are used to being rewarded for that toxic behavior, you get the world perception that everybody is like that. And though the world today is kind of crumbling and has a tremendous amount of issues, good men and men with good morals are not as few and far between as we're being led to believe as women. And the same is true with the inverse with men. But this environment, if you've been through anything like that, and maybe not abuse, maybe you've just been through a series of toxic relationships, putting yourself in that environment can really wake you up to see, like, no, people want to help you, men want to help you. There are respectful men who don't want you to lead with your sexuality, because in martial arts, you can't do that. And a lot of women today are trained to do that. And a lot of young women today are kind of relying on that because this is the thing being celebrated about them, right? But in martial arts, it's not like that at all. Like, when you're wearing a gi most of the time, if you go to gi classes, so you're completely covered. Like, I look like a child when I take classes because I'm such a short, petite woman, and I have a baby face when I'm not wearing makeup. So I look very, I feel like a 12-year-old boy most of the time whenever I wear a gi. But even in the non-gi classes, when you're grappling, like, people, the mentality of martial arts is, I don't know how to describe it, but it's not like, men are kind of trained out of that superficial ego and more into what the true masculine is supposed to look like. That's part of something that I think is really good for fighters. And now if you end up being some publicized, like, I won't say it, but I was talking to somebody from WWE from like a month or two ago, but obviously I'm not going to say who. And he was a very egoistic person, because the success of that television show kind of got to his head a little bit, and I got turned off very quickly and stopped speaking with him. But it does help you, for the most part, when it's not some oddity like that, develop a sense of your manhood or your womanhood outside of your sexuality, so people aren't leading with that when they're there. And it's a very side note thing, and people actually try to be super respectful and making sure that women feel comfortable and don't feel over sexualized in that environment. So I would highly suggest it. Like a few examples before I end this video. Men that had more experience than me or were older than me did a very good job of making sure that when we were grappling, like even if I had to submit or they understood that I was in a position where I was trapped or couldn't get out, that they stopped and said, hey, here's how you get out of this, and then taught it to me. So even though their goal when rolling was not to teach, their goal in rolling was to either submit me or not be submitted if I was winning. If it got to the point where I was stuck in something, and I'm brand new to this style, mind you, but regardless, they would stop and take the time to teach anyway and say, here's how you get out of this. And I could tell that the men, especially men in there who were dads or a little bit older, did a really good job of fathering, in the sense where it was kind of innate to their personality to make sure that I, as a young female in a dangerous world, understood something, understood how to get in and out of things if I was in a potential issue and all of that. So they didn't even have to, but they stopped and broke down things for me during rolling time instead of technique time. So I thought that was really cool. And you could tell their focus wasn't necessarily on their own gratification of being able to take down a woman half their size or anything like that. So they were still learning, but the goal was to make sure that there's mentorship going on. And martial arts also does really good at, with that too, because they'll never pair you. At least in jiu-jitsu, they typically don't pair you during rolling sessions with people on your same level, because at the studio I go to, he says all the time, we can't have the blind leading the blind. So a lot of the time they put you in a leader mentor position on purpose. That way you always have something pushing you to your next level, and mentorship is very important. So for women who have been through anything with toxic men, I think, one, it does give you a healthy aggression and sense of confidence and all of that. But on the other hand, I think it reinforces your femininity, because you see how much you can be respected and feel safe in an environment. Or, for example, anytime we were learning things, if there was a lock that maybe got close to the chest area, if you know, somebody had to touch me here or by my neck, or if we were practicing a lock that got close to the groin area or something, they'd be like, I'm not trying to be weird, can I do this? There was like a permission about it. There was, hey, can I practice this? Can I, you know, are you comfortable? It was a lot of, without me even having to ask, like, are you comfortable with this? Can I do this? So consent was a huge thing, and I found it really cool that the men were naturally inclined to ask those questions, and it was not something that came from any look of discomfort from me, or because I knew what I was getting into when I walked into the class, or anything that had to be prompted. It was the way they naturally function. So it makes women feel very safe, actually. And this is coming from a woman who has been raped in her adulthood and who has dealt with years of sexual trauma in my childhood and my early adolescence. So for me to say that in a room where men are trying to pummel me or having to put me in positions that could be compromising or uncomfortable, I felt very safe. So it made me feel very womanly, and it made me feel like I could accept the chivalry and help. And it's a very healing environment. So 10 out of 10 would highly suggest. Also, if anybody wants to know the studio I go to, or there's any women listening who want to at least try it out, if you don't sign up, I ended up signing up and staying because it was the addiction from doing it when I was younger and reminding how much fun I had, and then just the healing aspects as an adult. But if you want to know where I go, and just because there's very good men there, there's very good-hearted, good-moral men there, or you want suggestions for any other studios, try a class, message me, I'll give you information. And the studio I go to, the first week is actually entirely free, and you can take as many classes as you want to. If you want to go somewhere else, cool, but that option is on the table for people who want to try it out and see how it works for them, and what it can do for you, both in the sense of fighting and your psychological needs.